Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about internalized homonegativity and aging, which for various reasons is not a topic that's been examined very much in the literature, to my dismay. Just a brief agenda for the things I'll be discussing today. I'm going to go over some important key terms because there tends to be some confusion in this area. I'm going to look at some of the outcomes associated with internalized homonegativity, over the life course. I'm going to describe the current study that examined IH over the life course. I'm going to go over the results, discussion and interpretation of the results, implication of these findings and limitations, and some avenues for future research. So homophobia is the term that we often use and we often hear to describe the negative attitudes about homosexuality in ourselves and in other people. But in psychology, which is my background, we tend to be quite picky about the terms we use. And this term we don't like because it's very narrow, and it actually refers to a very specific phobia and fear of gay people. And I haven't really ever met anybody who has an actual phobic reaction around gay people. The term we sort of prefer is homonegativity, and this is a more encompassing term. So it includes homophobia, which is quite rare, and then also all the sort of negative cultural attitudes towards homosexuality and in ourselves and in other people. Internalized homonegativity basically refers to these negative societal attitudes that a gay person takes on and believes true in himself. And I think one of the things I just wanted to mention, I think it's possible, this is just an aside, that some people can feel quite bad about their sexuality, even in the absence of sort of internalizing negative cultural attitudes. And just the notion that you're very different from other people, that it may be somewhat harder to meet other people given our small composition in the population. I think even in a very supportive environment, people can still feel quite bad. So that's just something to keep in mind. Internalized homophobia forms one major component of what's called minority stress, and it's a term I'm sure most of us have heard, and basically just refers to experiences of discrimination and hassles in everyday life on account of being a minority, in this case, a sexual minority. Okay. Also, as we know, internalized homonegativity has been associated with increased risk for depression, anxiety, poor self-esteem, loneliness. This one I emphasize because people tend to poo-poo this, but it's actually quite a serious problem because people who are chronically lonely, the chronic loneliness has the same effect on your health as smoking about 15 cigarettes a day. So this is quite an issue, and I'm glad to see that it's getting more attention in the literature. Increased risk of suicidal ideation, and unfortunately completed suicides too, increased risk for substance misuse and abuse, and risky sexual behavior. The focus in the literature has tended to be on the risky sexual behavior, and when it's focused on the other issues, it's tended to be on how those issues affect risky sexual behavior. And this sort of annoys me a little bit because I think the other issues are important in and of themselves, irrespective of how they affect risky sexual behavior, because a lot of people actually don't have that much sex, and so the other issues are more important for them. Okay, so internalized homonegativity in age is very rarely examined in the literature in men over 40. Certainly not over. I haven't seen many studies with men over 50, and I think this may reflect a little bit of ageism on the part of researchers, or maybe some people believe if older gay men do have internalized homonegativity, they're so far gone, there's no point in even researching it because it's, I don't know what's going on, but I mean, it's sort of, people have made those kind of comments to me in an offhand way, and so I think it's unfortunate. Of the few studies they do have, most have been sort of anecdotal and qualitative. Not that there's anything wrong with qualitative research, it's wonderful, but I think we need more quantitative studies to look at homophobia over the life course, and particularly in different cohorts or age groups of men. So men who grew up in different generations where there were different levels of societal stigma against homosexuality. So the current study compared IH in different age groups, and also it examined whether any patterns by age differed by country. And this sample comes from the men in the current study. It's actually 900 men, come from men that I recruited as part of my thesis on physical attractiveness. So that was this actual studies is I'm not an expert on internalized homonegativity. I just happened to ask some questions about it. So the initial sample was 3,600 gay men, gay and bisexual men who participated filled out a survey in August 2010. I recruited them all online over about 10 days using Facebook, Craigslist, and some other websites. The vast majority of the people, to my surprise, came from Facebook. I put up a click ad, and then overnight I was just getting like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. So it looks like Facebook has some use other than just talking to people about what you ate for breakfast and playing that stupid Farmville or whatever. So, and it's like Facebook is wonderful. You have a captive audience. People just playing games and doing mindless things. They actually like to fill out surveys, and all my participants kept emailing me saying, "I want to fill out more. This is fun." So it's just I love it. So, all the surveys and basically when I talk about Facebook, I had click ads that people clicked on, and then they were transferred to a website that collected the data for my study. But in many cases, people also just posted links on their wall, and so people were sharing the link with their quote-unquote friends. Okay, and the data was collected anonymously. 1,200 of these men, 4 to 6 months later, did a follow-up study. And in that follow-up study, I included a couple of scales measuring internalized homonegativity. I think one of the reasons I wanted to see whether men who are higher versus lower in internalized homonegativity emphasize different body regions when assessing the attractiveness of other men. The current study was 900 of these 1,200 men, and these were specifically self-identified gay men because the scale that I used was initially developed using gay men. And they're men basically from 3 countries. I picked the countries where I had enough men to do comparisons. Not unfortunate, most of them were American. We had some people from Great Britain and only about 100 Canadians in this second round, but enough people to do comparisons. I then divided the people into sort of 3 distinct age groups, 18 to 29, 30 to 49, and 50 and above. And we see the average age is 24 or 40 and about 57. And I did this division because it sort of roughly corresponds to different cohorts where there were significantly different levels of societal stigma against homosexuality. And there's also a bit of a psychological divide here. 30 and 50 tend to be these points at which we start to consider ourselves old. I had a friend who just had a birthday and he turned 30, and instead of a birthday party, he wanted me to plan a funeral for him. It was quite, and then 50, I mean, once people hit 50, it's just, so these are not the most ideal groupings, but I based them on those criteria, and also there were statistical reasons. I wanted to have roughly equal numbers of men in each of these age groups because I needed that for the analyses that I did. We had, unfortunately, the sample was mostly Caucasian. There was a pretty even mix of urban and suburban men, partnered and single men, fairly educated sample. And I also did this, I included a measure of community involvement, which I used as a covariate in the analysis later. And of note here is that as men get older, they are more involved in the gay, as older men tend to be more involved in the gay community, so they have more gay friends, they participate in more gay-related events, they read more gay literature, things like that. So the measure that I chose for internalized homonegativity, it was actually really hard to find a good one because most of them are kind of crappy. And they're either too long or they were validated a long time ago, and they may not be appropriate for use with men today. A lot of them also measure things that are sort of related to internalized homonegativity, but don't really tap it directly. So there might be things like comfort with gay culture, or your level of how open you are about your sexuality with other people. A person could very well be comfortable with their own sexuality, but they might live somewhere that's quite a conservative area, and they don't want to divulge their sexuality to everyone. But that doesn't mean that person is, is self-loathing about their sexuality. And also, a lot of the measures look at how comfortable you are with men who sort of violate traditional gender norms, and that's related to internalized homonegativity, but isn't the same thing. So I picked this internalized homonegativity inventory, which seems to be the best of the bad. It's a fairly recent scale, and it measures 3 general factors: personal homonegativity, including your attitudes about sexuality and your feelings about it; gay affirmation, sort of feelings that being gay is a good thing, not a bad thing; and then a few questions about your attitudes about the morality of homosexuality. This scale, unfortunately, had not previously been validated with older men, and so before using it with older men, I had to modify the instrument. I won't get into details about how, but I did confirmatory factor analysis, and I trimmed some items so that the scale could be used to measure gay older men and younger men without fear of bias. And the original scale is 23 items, and the revised scale is 17 items, which is it's good because we like to use a brief measure. The scale is reliable. The scale is valid. It seems to be measuring what it should be measuring. People, for example, with high levels of internalized homonegativity are less likely to be in a relationship and are less likely to be involved in the gay community. And also importantly, there is no relationship between the measure of social desirability, the tendency to give a socially desirable responses to survey instruments, no relationship between that and measures of internalized homonegativity. So for my analysis, I'm sure most people won't care about this, but the data were very, very skewed because the people in my sample were pretty comfortable with their sexuality, so very few of them endorsed the high end of the range. And this poses some statistical problems, so I had to do a log transformation of the data to get a little more of a normal curve. I checked for homogeneity of variance for people who know what that is. Then I looked at internalized homonegativity by age group, then by country, and then the interaction between those two to see if there were any patterns. And then I did some tests. If there were any significant differences, I did some tests to pinpoint where there were differences. And finally, to examine the link between aging and homonegativity, I did a hierarchical linear regression, which basically meant I took the age and homonegativity, and then I started introducing some variables that are associated with aging to see if any of them explained the link that I saw between homonegativity and aging. And these are basically our results. So the first result is, I love line graphs. The first result is that there's a significant effect for age, and even the differences are not big because these men are relatively comfortable with their sexuality, but they are statistically significant. So younger men have higher levels of internalized homonegativity than middle-aged, and in turn, men over 50. And this was I expected the opposite pattern. I thought that men who were older might have the sort of highest levels of internalized homonegativity, having grown up at a time when homosexuality, there was a lot of stigma against homosexuality. It was the opposite pattern. There was no effect by country. It was the same general rates by country. And there was no interaction. So this pattern with younger, middle-aged, and older men was the same in Canada, the US, and the United Kingdom. And when I did my hierarchical regression, I found that one of the things that mediates this link between aging and internalized homonegativity was community involvement. Community involvement with the gay community tends to increase with age, and that explains to a great extent the relationship between age and internalized homonegativity. No other variables explain this relationship. So what does all this mean? It seems that internalized homonegativity declines with age, and I'm sort of purloining Dan Savage's little moniker here that it gets better with time, or at the very least, things don't get worse over time. And any stigma that people have experienced on account of the generation, at the time in which they grew up, seems to be tempered by sort of developmental, maturational effects. And some of those might be just gay identity development. Coming out is a lifelong process, and as people get older, they just become more comfortable with their sexuality. They make peace with it. People just over time tend to care a little less about what other people think of them. And based on the finding I just reported, as people interact more with other gay men, they probably become more comfortable with sexuality. They have more social support. Homosexuality becomes sort of normalized for them as they interact with more people who are like them. And then there's also this thing called socio-emotional selectivity. We talk a lot about this in gerontology, and basically refers to, it's sort of a lifespan theory of motivation, and it basically states, the researcher, the theorist states it as time horizons shrink, people become increasingly selective, investing greater resources in emotionally satisfying goals and activities. And there also tends to be a motivational shift in cognitive processing, with people tending to focus more on things that bring them satisfaction, and they focus more on positive thinking as opposed to dwelling on things that annoy them or make them angry. And you can see that the first part of that relates to interaction with gay men. I mean, as you're interacting with gay men, you're spending more time with people who make you feel good about yourself. And also over time, you're just dwelling a little less about the negative aspects of sexuality, if you feel that there are any. Something I wanted to mention, there's always this concern when you're measuring negative affect that people might react to scale items in sort of a really, they overreact to scale items. And I had quite a few scale items that were worded very harshly, and they sort of seems like they invoked, overt stigma against gay people. And I was a bit sort of concerned that these people would sort of overstate how comfortable they were with their sexuality, almost to sort of like convince me or themselves that they were feeling really good about themselves. I don't think this was too much of a problem because I didn't get that comment about really harshly worded items in the comments that I had from the participants. And I did remove items that were the most harshly worded. So implications of this, it seems that gay men are pretty resilient even in the face of stigma, that they do age successfully. But the internalized homonegativity is still a problem for many. We had most of the men in the sample did have some levels of IH. And it's important to note that even low levels of IH still affect health. And in combination with discrimination and other aspects of minority stress, this can be enough to lead to negative health outcomes. And for some people, things just don't get better. Things actually get worse. And I had some participants who recounted some very, very sad stories, and it really did seem, based on what they wrote, that life was not getting better for them at all. So it's important to keep that in mind. Young men seem to be at the highest risk for internalized homonegativity, so we should focus on helping them the most. And something that we should also consider is whether IH is a personal or social issue. There's been some criticism that by recasting internalized homonegativity as an internalized thing, we're sort of taking attention away from the fact that the problem is negative societal attitudes. The problem is not with the person who actually internalizes those attitudes. So that's something to keep in mind. Very quickly, some limitations. I had pretty much a biased sample. These are men who are already identified as gay. I didn't survey men who were sort of in the early stages of coming out. So these people have fairly low levels of IH. They were recruited as part of my attractiveness study, so people filling out a survey about what things they find attractive in other men probably feel pretty comfortable with their sexuality. I used men from Facebook. Some people might consider that a bias, but I actually found that my sample tended to be very, very diverse. I got men from different regions of different countries. I got men from all sorts of SES statuses, and I got a lot of men who told me, had I not seen an ad for the study, I wouldn't have participated in this or any other research. Some strengths of the study is that it's a large sample size. 900 is pretty large compared to the studies we have. Again, the sample was diverse. I examined older men, which is unusual. The survey was anonymous. Used a valid and reliable instrument, and I looked at IH between countries, and I showed that there was a consistency. It was interesting, even in the United States, which is fairly conservative compared to the other countries, this age effect was similar even in the United States. Future research might involve looking at older men. I didn't have my mean age for the older men was about 57. I'd like to see some older men, maybe look at a fourth cohort, look at men from other countries. In particular, Australia, I wanted to do them, but I didn't have enough older men to do comparisons. Other ethnicities, bisexual men in the early stages of coming out, lesbians, perhaps some qualitative studies examining the link between aging and IH. And some longitudinal studies to help us determine what causes what, because it's hard to do that when you have these cross-sectional studies. And also I want to do some improvements to this internalized homonegativity scale to make it a little less harshly worded, and then redo these analyses, and perhaps also use some other internalized homonegativity scales to see if I get the same results. So thank you for listening. And if anyone